There is a reasonable explanation. You are witches. Witches who are destined to save the world from impending doom.
So, it's finally here. The reboot so many of us have been dreading has descended upon us, and the big question is, exactly how good or bad is it? Well, we'll get to that shortly, but for now, let's dive into a recap. We open to a set of feet creeping down a hallway with ominous music, and did I just get dropped halfway into the episode? This does not seem like a solid opener. Turns out the feet belong to Maggie, and she's trying to sneak out wearing her sister Mel's boots. Mel pops into frame, and then the two hear their mother arguing with someone on the phone. She gives them a little spiel on how they need each other and need to nurture their sisterhood, and gee, I wonder what's going to happen to her. The girls leave the house, and their mother stays home and is attacked by some crows. She goes upstairs to the most ridiculously over-the-top attic and screams about having 3 of something as a fog ominously rolls in through the window. Mel goes to fetch Maggie from a frat party, and after making some on-the-nose statements about consent and rape culture, which seems completely out of place and out of the blue, the sisters run home in time to find their mother dead, with a ridiculous zoom which kind of made me laugh, which I'm pretty sure was not what the writers were intending. We then get the credits forming out of shattered glass, which admittedly is a pretty cool effect. We then move forward to 3 months later and meet Macy, who stumbles across the Vera house, and wait, that's the house from Witches of East End. The house apparently freaks Macy out, and she runs off to her lab to do some research on the house, which freaks her out even further. We then see Mel pinning up protest posters, and she runs into a Rupert Giles XP who has taken over her mother's position as head of women's study on the campus. We get some over-the-top dialogue with terms such as cis male and feminist thrown around, and then Mel is confronted by a caricature of a character in order to have some non-consequential SJW dialogue, after which she punches the guy because apparently feminism means it's okay to assault another human being. Mel has an awkward conversation with her ex, who also happens to be a detective, before going home to argue with Maggie about how neither of them are handling their mother's death well. In the middle of this argument, new sister drops by with a photoshopped picture of her as a baby in front of their house, and some freaky lightning happens, I guess symbolizing that the charmed ones have activated? Mel kind of acts like a douche, while Maggie attempts to at least find out what's happening, but Mel's attitude scares Macy off, and she leaves to go drinking with her friend. We then see all the girls' powers activate, and why they change the youngest sister's power from premonitions to mind reading is beyond me, especially since in the original series, Phoebe's premonitions were often how the sisters were warned about trouble that was coming. Macy discovers that she has telekinesis when she accidentally propels a beer bottle across the bar, and Mel panics and freezes an entire coffee shop. The girls are then kidnapped and tied up by their white lighter because nothing screams empowering feminist media like some white dude capturing and restraining 3 women. White lighter Giles proceeds to explain to the girls that they are witches and that their mother was also a witch who unbound their powers on the night she died. He presents the Book of Shadows and wait, is that Melinda Warren?
Who's Melinda Warren?
The beginning of our family line. She gave us our powers, our destiny.
The girls are informed that they have 24 hours to choose whether or not to accept their destiny and keep their powers before White Lighter Giles apparates away, leaving the girls to argue and eventually go their separate ways. Maggie decides that it's a smart idea to walk through the woods at night, while Macy goes back to the lab to do even more research, and Mel starts to get a hold of her power by freezing her ex-girlfriend before they start making out. Meanwhile, Maggie is attacked in the woods by a demon dog, and I mean, who saw that coming? She's apparently saved off-screen by some drunk frat guys and runs home where, again off-screen, she and Mel somehow manage to convince Macy to come back to the house. The show then attempts to mix science with magic by having Macy examine the magic residue that the demon dog left on Maggie. In a pretty cool twist, she manages to outsmart White Lighter Giles after he condescendingly tells them about the demon dog. We have an attempt at an emotional scene as Maggie and Mel argue about the night their mother died, before Maggie goes downstairs and is kidnapped by the episode's first red herring. Mel ruins her sister's chances at rushing the sorority, while Maggie narrowly escapes date rape from her possessed boyfriend. After some pretty crappy special effects, Demon Boy is back to normal, and Maggie seems perfectly okay with the fact that he just tried to attack her, possession or not. The girls walk off campus together, and there is an attempt at a bonding scene. Mel and Maggie take Macy home to show her home videos of their mother, and this scene is kind of sweet, but we still have no explanation as to why their mother never mentioned this half-sister, or even why she abandoned her in the first place. Macy realizes that the possessed boy was yet another red herring, and it seems that she's figured out who the real bad guy is. Unfortunately, Mel has put herself in danger by attending a rally protesting against said demon, or rather, against the human crapsack he's pretending to be, and she finds herself alone with him because, well, why wouldn't you go off by yourself when you know there's a dangerous demon after you? We get exposition about the demon and some truly bad special effects as the demon shows his true frost giant form. The girls get to show off their powers, and White Lighter Giles pops in at literally the worst moment to push the girls into accepting their powers. The girls fully become the Charmed Ones and start chanting in Latin, no power of 3 will set us free spell here, and manage to kill the demon, only to find out that their mother's murderer is still at large and something has just begun. White Lighter Giles has fun messing with the girls in a bit that I actually found quite amusing.
Why didn't he disappear then?
Oh no, this must be the kind of demon where you have to do one last thing to get him to disappear. Crack the neck, remove the eyeballs, eat the intestine. Only kidding, sometimes it just takes a minute.
The girls get a power walk, and then we see Macy move into the manor, and the girls using a Ouija board to try and contact their mother, which is kind of a cute little shout out to the original series. The girls are warned not to trust White Lighter Giles before he pops out of the shadows and... end scene. So, what's the verdict? For me to give you that, we're going to have to break some things down. When it comes to television and movies, the best route is always show, don't tell. The original Charmed is a great example of this. The pilot firmly establishes the sisters' dynamics and roles as the eldest, middle, and youngest siblings through their interactions with one another and the varying degrees of comfort they show in each other's company. Their individual personalities and the way in which their personality traits link to their powers is revealed over time and within the context of specific scenes and situations. We learn, rather than are told, that Piper's freezing power links to her panicky and anxious nature, that Phoebe receives premonitions because of her empathetic and open nature, and Prue's telekinesis is linked to her strong and angry personality. Because we learn this as we get to know the sisters, it provides natural and organic character development and lets us get to know the sisters individually and watch them grow into their powers. The new series opts for the tell don't show route, and instead of allowing us to get to know the sisters over time and see how their powers link to their emotions, we are told by their White Lighter that Maggie has mind reading because she's sensitive and insecure, that Mel can freeze things because she's a control freak, and that Macy has the best control of her powers because of her high IQ. There is no nuance, no subtlety, no slow exploration of the girls' traits, no allowing the audience to make up their own mind and interpretations of the characters and their powers. And the characters themselves are not particularly endearing. Maggie is a typical youngest sibling, with her airheaded ways and innocent nature clearly meant to emulate Phoebe's carefree ways and naive enthusiasm for the craft. However, in the hands of these writers, and with an actress who is not yet settled into the role, Maggie comes across as fairly vapid and somewhat fake, as do her sorority sisters, playing into some unflattering stereotypes about young women. Wasn't the show supposed to avoid this type of stereotyping and be more empowering for women? You can't rest on a statement like that and then get away with these kind of catty portrayals of girls. The middle sister Mel feels like another unfortunate stereotype, that of the man-hating feminist. She proudly screams about being a feminist, punches a guy in the face, and crashes a frat party to rant about consent issues. She is so over the top at times that she almost feels like a caricature, and she undermines her own agenda with her extreme actions and hyperbolic anger. It is great that she's gay and that she doesn't hide her sexuality, as this was one area where the original Charmed needed improvement, but her anger and vitriol against the patriarchy has unfortunate implications and seems to support the notion that lesbians hate men and are constantly angry. The elder sister Macy actually receives the best characterization, being unsure and anxious, but very kind and willing to form bonds with her newly found sisters. Of the three, she is probably the most organic character, and definitely the one I personally found most endearing. But it's kind of disheartening when two of the three leads read as flat characters, especially when the original series presented all three sisters as fully fleshed out and organic characters, all with their own endearing personalities and personal flaws right from the get-go. The episode also has issues with timing and pacing, and overall, it felt as if they were trying to pack several episodes worth of plot and development into the pilot in order to get the series rolling. However, in doing so, there was no time to absorb and react to the events. Everything moved too quickly to actually build characterization, and at times, it felt as if the director was simply running through a list of scenes and checking them off as quickly as possible, with no concern to how the plot would affect the characters or the impact it should have on their development. It left no time to appreciate the characters, the events, or the special effects, which, let's be real, were not all that better than the 90s graphics of the original series. All of this can be improved with time once the series settles into itself and figures out what direction it wants to take. But if there is one area where I feel the show really brought itself down, it was its attempt to be feminist and empowering. Two things which the cast and crew repeatedly talked about in the run-up to the show's start. Whereas the feminism of the original Charmed came out through its characters and the strength and independence of the sisters, this Charmed resorts to broad statements and inconsequential conversations which feel awkwardly inserted into the narrative. Take, for example, Mel's conversation with Whitelighter Giles in the school hallway. He mentions her paper making him feel like she castrated him. She drops the term cis male and rails about how he shouldn't be in charge of the women's study department. And then she leaves and almost immediately punches a sexist student in the face. The whole scene is over the top, on the nose, and extremely out of place in a show which is supposed to be about magic and sisterhood. The consequences of this verbose form of feminism and social justice not only alienates potential audiences, it stops the show from becoming timeless. In 10 years, someone will watch this show and know exactly which time period it's a reflection of. It is chock full of unsubtle 2018 sensibilities. Whereas the original Charmed felt timeless, dated only by its fashion and technology, this Charmed will not hold up in a decade. People will not be able to relate to it or its obtuse version of feminism and empowerment the way they still relate to the feminism and empowerment of the original series, and I feel that the new series has actually done itself a huge disservice by not making its feminism subtler and more organic. So what's the verdict? Well, despite what I've said, this show is actually not all that bad. For a standard CW show, I would put it on par with shows such as The Vampire Diaries, Pretty Little Liars, or Riverdale. It's entertaining, the actresses aren't terrible, and they have decent enough chemistry with each other, even if the pilot doesn't organically form their sisterly bond. But I don't think that it will have staying power, nor do I believe it will have the same impact that the original series did. It's light, it's fun, and if it were its own series with its own name and branding, it probably would have been better received. Its mistake was trying to cash in on an already successful and beloved show, and by doing so, it shot itself in the foot. All up, a fairly average start for a show which never really had much of a chance in the first place.